Hello there. Welcome to One Weekend Recordings with Alan D. Moore, in which I shall delight you, astound you, possibly terrify you, or disgust you with a piece of music conceived, recorded, and mixed here in my home studio, all in the space of one weekend. And yes, I am speaking to you. In past videos, I just put up slides with the commentary and played the music and let it speak for itself. But I found that with the music under 3 minutes and anything meaningful to say about the track, it was just impossible to actually read any of the slides. So this week I'm going to be providing you with a little commentary before the music, and then you can listen to the music. If you'd prefer not to hear me ramble on about this music and just want to hear the music itself, it's the last 2.5 to 45 of this video, so feel free to skip ahead, but you will lack the context and commentary which might help you better appreciate it. Friday the 13th. Yes, it was indeed a Friday the 13th when I began this recording, and a Friday the 13th in October no less. As the leaves are changing, the weather is getting colder and gloomier, and my neighbors are filling their lawns with mannequins doing unsightly things to one another. So, as I was out getting my nightly exercise, I began pounding out in my head and maybe slapping my knees, I don't know, with a beat in 13/4 time, a plodding rock and roll gloom. This became the basis for the piece which you're going to hear. So when I got home, I sat down at the cajon, and I began to pound out that rhythm in 13/4 time. And this is where the Friday the 13th mystery comes in. If you have listened to my recent videos, and by the way, let me just interject and tell you, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I only put videos out every couple of weeks. So when I do, you really don't want to miss that. So click that subscribe button. But I digress. If you've watched my recent videos, you might have known that I've recently restored or repaired an old Allied M3311 dynamic microphone, omnidirectional, and in that video, I talked about possible applications for that microphone, and I was having a hard time coming up with some. So, since I still had this fresh on my mind, it only seemed appropriate that I should try to use this microphone as much as I could. So, when I mic'd the cajon, I did something a little different than I normally do. I took a PVM 480 small diaphragm condenser in front. I usually put that behind. I put it in front of the cajon, just a few feet, and then put the Allied dynamic microphone close mic'd behind the hole. So when I listened back to the cajon tracks, I discovered that one of the tracks, which should have been the rear mic, actually had this very distant, roomy sound to it, and it was kind of nice. The combination of that and the front mic had a real nice sound, one of the better cajon sounds I've ever gotten in my studio. But strangely, it wasn't coming from the rear mic. On closer inspection, I noticed I wasn't getting any sound in that rear mic. That's the Allied mic that I'd repaired earlier. The cable had actually broken again. I had to stop and resolder that cable before I could go on recording. But that's the weird thing. Nothing else should have been picking up any sound. So I'm not really sure what microphone or device was picking up that strange, roomy sound, but whatever it was, it sure sounded nice. I hope I can reproduce that in the future. Well, in any case, here's a quick sample of that cajon track. By the time I was able to get back to this track on Saturday, an idea had solidified in my mind about where I wanted to take it. Since I had this nice cajon track with the natural room ambience, and this omnidirectional mic that I really wanted to play around with, I decided to make this piece a study in old school practical studio effects. What do I mean by that? So thinking back to the 1950s, the 1960s, the early days of multi-track recording, when people wanted interesting and cool new sounds, you didn't have software effects plugins. You didn't have racks of digital gear. You may not have even had analog gear that would make effects. But what you could do was use mic placement, do not recommended things with your tape machine, or use natural room ambiences to create a new kind of sound that people hadn't heard before. So all the tones you're going to hear on this recording were done using these old school studio techniques. The only digital effects that I used were some compression and some high-pass filtering. Everything else, the reverbs, effects, all achieved through real-world manipulation of the sound. We'll walk through this one track at a time, and I'll talk to you about how I got the sound. Way back in the 90s, when I was recording to reel-to-reel tape and looking for interesting sounds and didn't have a whole lot of effects that I could apply to my sounds, I started experimenting with putting a microphone at one end of a long tube and then pointing that at a sound source and getting some interesting resonance and strange sounds out of that. I decided I would try that. So I went out in my garage and I scared up a short, maybe 4-foot cardboard tube and a 10-foot metal pipe, and I brought those up into the studio and started setting up the mics. For the bass sound, I used my small custom practice amp. I set up the cardboard tube and put the omnidirectional mic in the end. And that gave me kind of an interesting boxy sound that was almost like an upright bass, an electric upright bass. I then doubled the bass with a guitar through the exact same setup, just with the overdrive engaged on the amp. So for my lead guitar sounds, I employed my Little Smoky amp. This is a little pocket-sized amp that runs on a 9-volt battery. It's very loud and very overdriven. I had the Little Smoky amp sandwiched between the metal tube and the cardboard tube with a small diaphragm condenser at the end of the metal pipe and the omnidirectional mic pointed down the tube. This definitely gave me an interesting sound, to say the least. For my clean rhythm guitar sound, I wanted kind of a swirly, chorusy effect, but again, I don't want to use electronic effects. So I pointed the custom amp straight at the sound hole in the back of the cajon. And then I hung my little PV condenser mic from the cable right between the two like a pendulum. And every take, I would just give it a little shove and it would just swing back and forth. So as it passed by the amp and the sound hole, it would suddenly get a swell of resonance. And that sounded pretty cool, although I had to stop and redo a lot of takes because I had to keep that mic moving in the air. After laying down all the guitar tracks, I wanted something to sit in for a ride cymbal or a hi-hat. I could have dragged the hi-hat out of my kids' room, but here I was with a 10-foot metal pipe and a drumstick handy, so there's your ride sound. By late Saturday night, I was pretty pleased, but I kind of felt like it was lacking something special. It was still pretty dry sounding, even with all the room mics and the tubes and all the weird stuff. But time rolls on and Saturday had come to a close, so time to sleep on it. Sunday afternoon, it was time to get down to business and provide that extra special something that would really finish up this track and also do something about the lack of ambience and reverb. I wanted to take the extra solo guitar and apply some kind of interesting effect to it. So I cranked it up through a cheap set of earbuds as loud as it would go, so it was really distorted, and I cupped my hands around it and held it up to the mic, and as the track plays, I'm sort of opening and closing, like clapping my hands almost. Again, that's not electronics, that's just me cupping my hands over the speakers and waggling them back and forth. Now to do something about the reverb. Back in the 60s and before, studios often had reverb rooms, just big reflective rooms with beautifully designed ambience, speakers at one end, microphones at the other, and when you needed reverb, you just piped the sound through those speakers, brought it back in through the microphones, and you had beautiful natural room ambience. Sounds like a great idea, but the problem is, I don't have a room like that. And again, I've got 5 kids, so there's not a whole lot I can do in my house as far as just open miking. But I still wanted that natural room reverb. So I chewed on this as I was chewing on lunch, and I had a great idea. Something that was done a lot back in the days of tape was that you could speed up or slow down the tape, apply some kind of effect, and then when you set it back to the normal speed, that effect would be slowed down or speeded up, and it would change the quality of the effect. It occurred to me that I could do the same thing with digital technology and double the size of my room. So I set up my PV microphone in the other corner of my room, pointed at the wall, not at the speakers. I turned up the speakers, and I set the sample rate of my audio card to twice the normal sample rate, so that when I played back the track, it played back at double speed. After I played the track and recorded the room reverb, I slowed it back down to normal speed, and it worked. I had a really nice big room reverb. It was a bit muddy, so I cleaned that up with a high-pass filter and mixed it in, and as you'll hear, it sounds pretty reverberant. At that point, I just did some mixing of levels, and I put a high-pass filter on the wah-wah sound because the clapping of my hands was creating some low thumpy noises. But other than that, it was good to go. So, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to leave you now with the track that I've been describing. This is Friday the 13th.